Good afternoon, and I'm going to take you on a tour. So I'm Virginia. I work at New York Presbyterian Hospital, if you haven't met me already. And I also work at Columbia, teach in the informatics department there. And I've been involved with FHIR for a long time, but I've been involved with HL7 for longer. So I've been doing many of these things for many years. And where am I taking you? So, you know, lots of times when we go to different classes at DevDays, we focus in on specific like resources that have like kind of generic structural purposes, which is good, you know, or maybe sometimes a niche area. I'm going to try and cover a whole bunch of ground. You know, I am going to skip some resources that might be your favorite resources. I'm sorry if I'm skipping them and you want help on how to get there. One I'm going to kind of skip is some of the resources payers might care about. But like that, then I would recommend you to go to any sessions related to Da Vinci, or I don't know if there's any Karen sessions here, but those are helpful. So we're going to do a tour so that when we're done, you're going to be able to summarize resources defined in FHIR that are foundational, that support, this thing is driving me nuts. There. Is that okay? Okay. That support healthcare administration and that support clinical processes. And then as we're going on the tour, you know, we're going to stop a little here and there. And we're just going to, you know, because you want to do that when you're on a tour. Sometimes you want to stop and really look at something, right? We're going to stop and we're going to look at some little nuances in resources that are useful to know and will help you to understand resources in general. Maybe some of these things you know already, but you're like, aha, you know, now that makes sense. I'm hoping you guys maybe have some aha moments maybe here and there. So in those stops, we're going to describe some of those common notations, look at things like maturity and how resources relate to resources. And somewhere in here, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to throw a pitch for implementation guides if you haven't figured out they're really important, but just in case you have an issue, I'm going to try and drive that home. But are we ready? Okay. And am I right now already talking too fast for you? Okay, let me know, because I speak New York English. Okay, so we're going to start out with resources that are foundational, right? And the most foundational resource is the resource upon which all other resources are built. And so resources inherit the attributes from the resource, or at least, and one particular one inherits from them, which we're going to talk about. But indirectly, all the resources are inheriting the attributes from here. And you know, this is like this secret thing that, you know, sometimes when people first look at FHIR, they don't realize, oh, there's these other fields where they come from. You know, so this is where we have a resource ID. Without a resource ID, you cannot do FHIR, right? It's our instance identifier. And this is also where you will find language, you know, and we're starting to really finally embrace it. That's really important. So what language is this resource written in? This is also where you can find some implicit rules and also where you can find metadata. And then in metadata, these are some really important fields, like when was it last updated? What's the version? What profile was this created with? And some other things, security tag, et cetera. So just realize that that's baked into every single resource in FHIR, but it might not be obvious, but it's there. Then we have the domain resource. And the domain resource is of type resource, which is nothing you usually see. This is how resources can inherit from another resource. It's actually a very odd, very rare thing you will see in FHIR. Usually we don't inherit, but we do in this case. So all those things we just saw were inherited, again, from the resource, but domain resource adds a whole bunch of other things. And most resources in FHIR inherit from domain resource. So in here you have our great text field. Do you know what text field is for? Anyone know? See if you're awake. Anyone? Well, it is like a summary. What it is a narrative. It's the narrative of what is structured in the resource. And this is one of these things that took us years to realize that this is a really useful thing. It's really useful to have a human narrative. So a person can read this, and it tells you what is in the resource itself. We learned that from CDA, our time we spent developing standards for structured documents. And I know for me at New York Presbyterian how useful it was to get the medication we were prescribing to doctors across an interface to also have that human narrative, because it kind of helped us kind of double check that we had it right. You will find it's a very useful thing. So I encourage you to use that field, and I would hope that implementation guides require it. There's also a concept of contained resources, and you'll see in a lot of resources, they have sort of a group of fields that are actually a contained resource. It's really not a separate resource. And then a really important thing about FHIR is the ability to extend it. When it comes to standards, every once in a while we need to break the standard. But what you need is a standard way to break the standard. And extensions provides us that standard way. It allows us to add an element, and add other things. But we can do that with extensions. And there's two different kinds of extensions. There's your regular extension, and there is the modifier extension. And the modifier extension, the only difference is you can't ignore it. So the way you really want to do FHIR is you don't want to use modifier extensions. You want to use regular extensions. Because if I'm talking FHIR and you're talking FHIR, but I have extensions and you don't know about them, you'd like to just ignore it, right? And that would be better interoperability. But every once in a while, you might need a modifier extension. And a modifier field in FHIR is a field that modifies the meaning of the field, so it can't be ignored. And I'm going to show you one of those coming up. I'll just leave that for dramatic effect, okay? We'll wait to find out. And so we have resource. We have most resources inherit from domain resource, which inherits from resource, okay? All through this meeting, you're hearing people talk about IPS. And we hear IPS, International Patient Summary. Well, that is a structured document. And being able to communicate documents can sometimes be really useful. We like to be very discreet and say, oh, here's a medication, like on real time, here's an observation. But sometimes you actually want to say, this is a discharge summary and has all these parts to it. And composition is the resource that actually gives that structure. We're going to have a medication section. We're going to have a procedure section. And document reference is a resource that gives you kind of header information and allows you to kind of refer to a document of any purpose. Maybe it's even MIME encoded, I don't know. So both useful resources that help you communicate about documents. And then we have exchange-related resources. And our primary exchange paradigm in FHIR is using RESTful APIs. So we have some resources that help with that, but we also have some other exchange paradigms. Well, one is the idea of documents. But we also have subscriptions. And this is where I can subscribe to something I'm interested in, and then I can get notifications pushed to me. So that's the subscription status, and subscription topic help with that. And then also, we have another paradigm, which is messaging. A real-world event happens, and then a sending system will push a message out to a receiving system. And that's why we have these message resources that kind of provide the header or the definition of it. And then in our RESTful API and in some of these other ones, we talk a lot about bundles. It's really useful not to just have a resource, but a bunch of resources put together. That's a bundle of resources. A really common one you're going to see in your very first days of picking up FHIR is a bundle of resources that you would have gotten back from a FHIR search. There's one for transactions, for batch. So it's like a resource of resources, and it's grouping them together. Operations are really important in FHIR, but a lot of times we talk about the RESTful API operations you get just from the RESTful API. Create, read, update, and delete. Those are the same operations that the Twitter API is using, or whatever it's called now. But sometimes we want to go beyond that. And we have operations we've invented that are baked into FHIR, such as the metadata resource. I was very excited to learn about the metadata resource because it's like one resource I could use against like every FHIR endpoint out there. I could do metadata. Ooh, look what they have, metadata. Ooh, let's see what that hospital down the street has. Metadata. Ooh, look, and it returns the capability statement. And it tells you everything that that FHIR API supports and doesn't support, so long as the people that wrote that FHIR API did their work and filled out their capability statement properly. One thing I've learned is, you can't necessarily trust everyone on this stuff. So another resource is transaction. And then you will have, operation. And then you'll have operations that are created for implementation guides. So an example of that would be the dollar book operation for the Argonaut scheduling implementation guide. And a lot of good examples of that. When you have an operation, you can really kind of limit what you're going to be pulling out of resources, how you're really going to use those resources beyond your create, update, delete, and read. So we have some resources that help us define those, like an operation definition, parameters. So parameters are, parameters when you're doing operation definition is kind of like metadata. That's like actually defining the operation. This is what metadata is. That's like a meta thing. But parameters are like, these are the parameters I'm sending into the operation and ones I'm getting out. Any of you guys programmers, just makes basic common sense, right? And then operational outcome is kind of like the errors and information you're getting back. And so that is operations. And then we have some security resources, but FHIR doesn't tell you how to do FHIR securely, right? We have Smart on FHIR, which provides a secure way of using FHIR. And we have UDAP on FHIR. There are ways you can do it securely. But we do have some resources and different kind of attributes of FHIR that can help you do a better job doing things securely, and also respecting patient confidentiality. And so the security-related resources in FHIR include consent. I think of that more as confidentiality and privacy. But this is, a record of a patient's consent, what the patient wants to allow you to do. Permission, which is somewhat related. It more has to do with like regulations. Audit event, it's really important from a security perspective and privacy perspective to know what did people do, and can I get an audit trail of that? And kind of going along with that is something called provenance. Provenance is something I'm really excited about. It's always good to know who did what when with what weapon. It's like the game of Clue. You got to solve all those things. So all of those are given to you by the provenance resource. We call them the 5 Ws. But you don't always need to send a provenance resource with every other resource you're sending. That would get really messy, right? Instead, we have what we call little p provenance, which means that baked into a whole bunch of different resources, especially kind of medical records type resources, we have the fields that you would expect that are in the provenance resource are actually baked into a lot of resources. So we have something called what we call in FHIR a pattern. And the pattern says, this is how you'd represent who, what, why, when, where. And these are all the resources that are doing this. And it's kind of like, we kind of went and started, resources already existed and we started harmonizing them. So they all kind of use the same fields. So you get something with a pattern that actually looks like a resource, but it's totally not implementable. It's more a way that once you understand a pattern, then when you look at the many resources of FHIR, you know, oh, it's the 5 whys pattern. I know to expect that from all of these resources. I've seen this before. It's useful to understand patterns, right? That's how we learn, right? You can see a pattern, it's good. So learning the patterns will help you understand FHIR resources better. So, yeah, I don't know why I'm looking up there. It's right here. I think it was because that guy was looking up there. I'm like, oh, what do you see? And there are other patterns as well. We're going to talk about one that's pretty important in a bit, but just leave that for exciting suspense. And now we're going to talk about what I like to call give me 2 really healthy vegetables. Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. Cauliflower and broccoli. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. That's good. I was like, oh, I'm predicting you're saying that. Good. There are, in interoperability, to have interoperability at scale, there's two things you need, but I'm telling you, it's like broccoli and cauliflower, and we need people to eat them to be healthy, but sometimes you gotta like spice it up, so I'll try. But one is conformance, and the other is terminology. These are two incredibly important things, and most people do not get it until, you know, what happens when you don't eat your broccoli and cauliflower? Bad things, right? Until bad things happened. You know, that's how I'm able at New York Presbyterian to defend why we have to have controlled terminology versus terminology let wild, doing whatever it wants. Because without terminology, we can't do all these great things we want to do, and harm happens. But until you actually can kind of show that, I mean, because, and we call them terminologists at our hospital. You know, doctors that are terminologists, in fact, and they go home for Thanksgiving. They say, what do you do on terminologists? Oncologist, terminologist. You know, it's horrible for them. I've actually will get terminologists and invite them, and, you know, have them meet other terminologists so that they have friends and a support group. Anyone here a terminologist? No one here is admitting to it. See, that's how bad it is. Anyway, so both of these areas are very important. So conformance, because who likes the word conformance, right? I don't like to conform. You'll notice a lot of non-conformant people are really into conformance here. It's a really weird thing. So conformance means, you know, what's really important with standards is that people actually follow them. Otherwise, why do we bother, right? So we need ways to be able to support that. And like I said, we need structured ways of breaking the standard and making implementation guides that tighten all the rules in FHIR and extend them in a standard supportable way so that we can actually have a language that this plug over here and this outlet over here, we can put them together and not get electrocuted. And you're not going to get that without something called implementation guides. And all of these resources are the ones you would use to build implementation guides. But because there are a lot of nerds floating around here, they actually wrote FHIR with the conformance resources. So the actual spec is written with FHIR, which hurts my brain. So structure definition is how resources are written. You know, operations that are in FHIR, like metadata, is written using these operations, but they're also what are used to extend the standard. And so all of these, and even an implementation guide has a resource. But I still haven't gotten to my little sales pitch about why implementation guides don't. That was just the first one. I have another sales pitch. Terminology resource is very important. Yeah, because I think people think that it doesn't really matter, but you'll see. If you can't plug the thing together, why does it matter? This is the thing. It is perfectly fine if you're going to do it once. But if you're going to do it over and over again, it's not fine anymore. It's one of those things like, let's say I want to communicate with Dave. So Dave and I, we have decided to develop a secret language. So we have a language. We invented the whole language, and we communicate with each other. That's great. But then if I had to do that again when I talk to you or talk to you, it's not going to be scalable. And that is a reason for standards. But FHIR is just almost like a suggestion. It's a framework, because we have to be really open with FHIR. So we support, you see, all the countries that are in this building, right? And all the different use cases. So that's why we have to tighten those rules for specific use cases. But that might be something you have to tell people. You have to go back and say, no, please stop using naked FHIR. You need to clothe it in an implementation guide. This is downright embarrassing, okay? Terminology, really important. You want to have controlled terminology. And it's not enough to just have a field coded. If you want, use whatever local codes. Local codes, you don't have interoperability. We did that. It's horrible. We had problems in my organization where people couldn't even define on local codes in my organization. We had this group, this clinical group, that decided to create their own code set for religion. And I'm like, you know, with all due respect, you could have seen what medical records was doing. But then they got like, well, no, I got all religious on me, you know? It's like, you have to give up your set, you know, let's work together. And like, and you know what? I think ISO just came up with one. Can we just use that one? but once people start creating their own code sets, they get very much like, you got to do it this way. It is really important to use terminologies, controlled terminologies, find them. We have little ones in HL7. They're usually the orphans that no one else wants to adopt, but we prefer to work with standards organizations that create terminologies, like SNOMED CT, or like, anyone know any popular healthcare terminology out there? LOINC, yes, LOINC. I remember back in the day, this will date me. I got the floppy in the mail for LOINC, and it had a picture of a pig on it. But yes, LOINC, and RxNorm, and there are others. But LOINC and SNOMED CT are two of the really big ones out there. But if all you say is the code system, well, that's really not saying much, because SNOMED CT is unbelievably immense. You need a value set from within there. LOINC is really big. You need a value set. So that's, this is, remember math, value set, right? You're reducing the domain. I only want eye colors. Well, that's this tiny amount of SNOMED. So when you have an implementation guide, you can specify, I want this code system and this value set. Maybe the value set's actually from multiple code systems, but you need ways of expressing that, and that can be done with these resources. And also, you can actually go and talk to a terminology server and say, hey, you know what, I got the LOINC, can you give me the SNOMED for that? Or can you tell me what's in the value set for this? Can you expand it so I can show a list? Oh, here are the eye colors. Oh, thanks. So that's how a terminology server can be really useful. And you want to make sure you're working with terminology servers. So these resources support terminology. And if you I'm going to skip the terminology classes here because it's boring. It's like cauliflower. I'm telling you, incredibly important. You will not have interoperability if you don't have terminology. Your interoperability will die. Bad things will happen. Okay, and then some et cetera. Okay, two other foundational resources. One is binary. It's like I got a little blob thing here. And we have a little bit of metadata around it. And that can be useful, And the other one is basic. So basic is kind of like this resource that has like the metadata, and then you just pretty much like do what you want. Extend it, whatever. It's not basic. It's not basic at all. I've watched people do this back when we had HL7 v2. They would do stuff like this, and they would make standards. They would make implementation guides or interfaces that were completely inoperable. They couldn't talk to anyone. Because you don't want to be inventing it because you're not going to be able to communicate. That's like me, I speak English, but I've invented all my own words. It's not useful, right? So don't ever use BASIC unless you've got a really good case. I wouldn't use BASIC until you have lunch with Lloyd McKenzie and he agrees you should use it. Now, it doesn't have to be Lloyd McKenzie, but he is what do you call that? He's a good yardstick. I don't think Lloyd was here yesterday, but Lloyd, if anyone hasn't experienced Lloyd McKenzie, part of being at DevDays is experiencing Lloyd McKenzie. So make sure even your coffee, I said, Virginia told me I need to experience you. Okay, go meet him. But he is certainly one of the FHIR founders. But from an architectural perspective, it is a really bad idea to think you can go off on your own and go rogue. You go on chat.fhir.org and say, hey, I have this thing that I don't think any of you guys have thought of yet. I don't know if you've noticed how smart people are out there. I'm sure you guys are very smart here. We've already invented it. But if we haven't invented it, you should be in the community helping us invent it, right? Because we're doing this together. So don't use BASIC unless you've got a good reason. I'm not saying you're not going to have it. I tell my researchers at Columbia, I'm like, you may have reasons, but you need to get to HL7 and you need to say, I want to improve this. So let's talk about people. The people that you can represent with FHIR. Well, we have patients. They're the subject of care. And patients can be linked to other patients, like mom and newborn. In my case, it was mom and my 3 newborns. And then you have a patient could be linked to maybe a practitioner. That's someone who's responsible for a patient's care. And then we have some related people. They're not directly responsible, supposedly. I don't know. I'm a big person about caregivers. You know, I'm strong feeling about that. Don't tell me I'm not responsible for my daughter's care, because the government will come and take them away from me if I don't take care of them, so you're wrong. Family member, neighbor, guide dog. Yes, my daughter's grown up. Her dog is now responsible for her care. And then we have person. But nobody does any inheriting from person. Person's just out there on its own. It has demographics fields in it, but so does patients, so does related person, so does practitioner. Now, there are some people in FHIR, HL7 land that are trying to turn the world upside down and say, you're totally missing the client that goes for help at a community-based organization. Or a member of an insurance plan that is yet to get health care. Now, that is covered in patient. But there's some argument there, but it's really hard, so we say represented as patient. Because the problem is that the FHIR standard did not get created yesterday. It's been around a while. It's getting more and more baked. And the more and more baked it gets, the more and more people are using it. And once everyone's using it, you can't go and reinvent the wheel from the very bottom. We can't say, okay, today we're going to redefine the word the. And that does happen in languages, right? People do reinvent basic words in languages, but it's a little bit harder. And one of our big rules with FHIR is, in FHIR, who's always right? Guys, who's always right? Good answer. I guess. I don't know, you married? Oh, yeah. Bad answer. Who's always right? Who's always right? You. Even better answer. A+. Who's always right? Oh, come on. Give me the answer I'm looking for. Who's always right? What? Oh, that's the answer I'd really want, probably, but no. That's another good answer for me, A+. So what I always heard, and it's so much fun when I'm working near Presbyterian, the customer is always right. Who's heard that? Okay. But in FHIR, it's the implementer who's always right. Yep, that's you. The programmer's right. We have all respect for the programmer, because guess what? You're the ones who have to actually do it, right? So, of interest. I have no clue why I told you that story. It has to do with the elderly brain. That's why I'm glad you guys are here, so you can keep this going and we can actually change the world. No pressure, though. Now, something missing here was contact person. This is really useful, when, let's say, you're admitted to the hospital. I hope that never happens to you, but they usually ask you for some sort of emergency contact, nearest relative. That person is not represented anywhere in here. And that is because that is contained in the patient resource. So let's go there. So here's the patient resource. Has anyone looked at the patient resource before? Okay, good. I've got more hands. Let's look a little closer. Okay, so here's the patient resource, and you really will, because I have it in small print. So here's the patient resource. You will notice that there are these weird little symbols, okay? If you have a question mark, that is called the choice indicator. And this just says that, well, that field there, it could either be multiple birth Boolean or multiple birth integer. It's not an array or anything. It means it could either be one or the other. So when you actually have the resource going along the line, the field will say multiple birth Boolean, or it will say multiple birth integer. Because like for me, for example, I started with false, and then it changed for me and it became 3. See? Okay. Then we have primitive. That just means a basic data type. That's represented, I don't know, is that like a disk drive, I think. The disk drive over there is primitive, just like, I don't know, integer, basic data type. But then a complex data type is represented with the, what do we have it, is a nice cube. And that's when you're going to have multiple parts of it. It's almost like a resource in itself. And we have that with photo. And then you have this thing which is a container. Remember container from that metadata? We have a container for fields, and that's represented with this folder. And if you open that up, you'll get the fields like here, for contact. So contact is represented in the patient resource, but it's kind of like almost like a mini resource that's glued into the patient resource. You'll also notice there's a whole bunch of flags. And flags are really useful indicators. Like one flag is the summary. So when you do a search and there's one of the search parameters is summary. Then all the fields that have a little summary indicator will come back when you do the summary search. How cool is that? And then you have something that says it's a modifier. And if it's a modifier, it means what? Unsafe to ignore. What field has modifier on here? Yeah, you don't want to ignore that, right? It's good to know whether the person's dead, yeah, right? And there are other ones too, like the person does not have this allergy. Well, it'd be good to know that, right? Or we've ruled this out. We actually had someone who did something wrong from an interoperability perspective, and they took the message that you needed an MRI to rule out cancer, and they moved it to you have cancer. So it's good to know the reason. And then we also have invariants. Rules apply. And you'll notice that there's a little comment here that says, there's a rule, shall at least contain a context details, or Virginia puts something in front of it, or a reference to an organization. So you'll have little rules that you have to follow. That's the invariant. Okay. And I'm going to do my next sales pitch for implementation guides. And it's cardinality. So cardinality, 0 to 1, optional, max 1, 0 to 3, max 3, 0 to star, infinite number, which, with some limitation, of course. 1 to 1, mandatory, so you got to have that. Max 1, 1 to star, mandatory, max any. What do you notice about the cardinality here? Yeah. Can you imagine having a healthcare system where you don't require any data in a patient resource? This is the stuff you specify in implementation guides. Don't implement the naked FHIR standard. It's embarrassing. What's that? Where's the I was giving an example, yeah. There may be a case, I don't know. And then there are also some clues you're going to find when you look at the line on a resource. Like everything at the very top line is really useful. Like if you're into, if you know a prior standard like V2, you can find mappings, a whole bunch of useful things that are up there on that top line. But my very favorite one up there is, if you're a software developer, what's your favorite thing on that top line? Oh, maybe you guys do it differently than I did back in the old days. Back in my day, we took the computers apart and we did assembly language. But examples. And you could just Google or whatever, ask ChatGPT, and it'll pull all the examples out. You don't really actually need to read the FHIR spec. But there's tons of examples. And what these examples show you is how people have thought about really useful examples applied to real healthcare use cases. So if you're someone who doesn't know healthcare as well, you'll learn from reading those examples as well. And the same thing, if you don't know FHIR very well, technology very well, but you know something clinical, you can learn from that. So some of these examples might also be a way that you can work with other people. Like, let's say you're working with a doctor. It might be a way to communicate with them. And the resources, the examples are represented in like kind of a real kind of text-friendly way that, just narrative. And then they've represented in JSON and XML, if that's the language you speak. So you have all of those, and you kind of put it together. So very useful list of examples for all the resources. I mean, back in the day, we were lucky to do one. Oh, good. I'm really going to move along here. Okay, we're going to go faster. So responsible work group. These are the people to yell at and blame when there's something wrong with the resource. This is really important. It's maturity of a resource. So if it's 0, that means nobody's tested this. People hardly even have used it, but they just thought it was a good idea. It's there. If it's N, it's normative. It is going to be like, it's going to take like an act of God, and you have to get past Lloyd McKenzie to change that. There's a formal process to do it, not Lloyd McKenzie, but still, you still have to get past him. That's called normative. And then everywhere along the line is like the maturity. If you get to 2, you're like a teenager, you're probably a young adult at age 3. The more mature you get, that means the more people are already using it and the less chance you'll change it. Sometimes you want to be early on because you want to have that chance to change. But, you know, if you really want something that's going to be production ready and maybe someone else knows your language, you're going to want to be closer to the end there. Okay, healthcare environment, and I am low on time. We talked about some of these, but there's also things like organizations, locations, endpoints. The endpoint is like the FHIR endpoint. And we can do groupings of things. So there's the care team resource and the group resource. What's the difference, Virginia? I'm glad you asked. So the group resource is a group of things like a cohort of people in research, or a group of people that participate in group therapy, or a flock of birds that have some horrible disease. But a care team is that group of people that come together centered around a patient to take care of them. That is the difference. Let's look at the encounter resource, an encounter with the healthcare system. This is another view of a resource. We did the structure view before. This is the UML view. And here, those contained resources are blown up. Those are the boxes around the edge. They're not other resources. They're all part of the encounter resource. But then you'll see in here that the data type called reference, and that's where things refer to another resource, such as subject, or based on, or service provider. You say one. Is medications on there? Yeah, I'm sorry. It's very. I've seen all of you going. Yeah, sorry. That was probably in there, but it's too small for me. I can't read either. Episode of care. You know, you're all sitting in the back. You know. Yeah, the only people sitting in the front are the people who are late, right? So, episode of care is a resource that if you have like an episode where you have multiple encounters, this kind of packages it together. But this is an important thing to know about FHIR. The way episode of care works is there's encounters that are all part of an episode of care. But an episode of care will never tell you the list of encounters. When we have references to other resources, it's usually one direction. Still have a poster of the One Direction from my daughter when she was a child. Anyway. Clinical process, how do we represent that in FHIR? We assess, we plan, we treat. I think there's some looping that goes on. So imagine a clinical visit. We assess, what problems do you have? What's your family's medical history? Do you have allergies? What meds are you taking? Let's run some diagnostics on you, vital signs, labs, imaging. I'm gonna have to order those, right? Get back those results. We're gonna evaluate, we're gonna diagnose. We're gonna develop a care plan. Maybe we've developed a care plan already, started, because this kind of keeps going. And then we're gonna do more orders to treat, right? We're gonna, referrals and procedures and medications, and maybe we're gonna send you home with a walker. I don't know, I hope not. And then we're going to, and then there are the treatments themselves. And there are the observations themselves of those diagnostics. And all of those can be represented in FHIR. And then the care plan, which is really interesting. This is the plan of care, which, by the way, is available. This is one of the things that's available in the United States with our U.S. Core Implementation Guide. You can get the care plan. So the care plan is, will tell you what's being ordered on the patient, what their conditions are, what their goals are. And orders, like in healthcare, orders are like really important. It's like doctors are ordering everyone around. Nurses can order things too, and other people. But really, it's just a request because people can order all they want. Like I was a mother, I ordered my kids around. They didn't do what I said, but then the ancillary is supposed to do it, right? So these are all types of orders. We call them, but they're really requests. And then we have the events, the resulting events that happen, like a procedure is done, or a diagnostic report is delivered, or we dispense a medication, we administer a medication. Not always the same thing, right? We deliver that walker. These follow patterns as well. So there's 3 patterns that relate to workflow. One is the request pattern, one's the event pattern, and one's the definition pattern. You just met two of them right then, but the definition is that meta one. It's like, okay, well, I want to order something, so I'm ordering it, but really, there's like a template for that order of what you would typically have as defaults and fields. Oh boy, I think I'm kind of close. That's what you could define here. He's giving me time limits. That's why it's nothing, because she feels left out. So, there's also care plan definition. So, what is the typical care plan that we would have for this patient that has come in that we think had a stroke or whatever? And order sets could be part of this. Like, what is the typical one? And then the doctor actually makes one. Those are all examples of definitional resources. Another pattern. Observation resource, really important resource, refers to a lot of other resources. You could use this to represent anything, really. It's an observation. The tricky thing here is the field in here, which people in the back cannot see, called value. And the value has a data type. Can someone in the front tell them what the data type of value is? The data type of value is? It's a trick question. What is the data type of value? Close. The value type of data type is data type. I'm sorry. I should have let you not have done this after lunch, right? Yeah, it's the wild card. It can be anything. So then then you specify what the type is. So it's the wild card type. Observation can be anything. It could be your sodium level. It could be your autopsy. Who knows? We like to assemble a bunch of observations together, especially for lab and diagnostic reports. That's a nice grouper there. CBC is a really important test. At some point in your life, you'll have one if you haven't already. Grouped together, same sort of thing with the one direction. Diagnostic report points to the observations. I don't think they point back. Every once in a while, bidirectional is allowed. And guess what? We're done. So this is our tour conclusion. I didn't get everywhere you wanted. And I hit some areas that you have 15 difficult questions, which is why I recommend that you go to all the experts here and ask them about it. You can ask me questions too. But hopefully I gave you a taste, kind of a whirlwind tour, so you have an idea, if you can really wrap your mind around all the kinds of resources we have in FHIR, and also how you actually read a resource and look for patterns so you can kind of get your arms around it. And the other thing is, you're not sure, look at examples. Ask at chat.phir.org. Don't do anything alone. We have community that's stronger than the spec. I cannot even, you felt it here, right? You feel in the community? This community is extremely valuable. Look for implementation guides. Do not do base FHIR. Find an implementation guide. Like I said, embarrassing. Okay, so now you can identify key foundational, administrative, and clinical resources in FHIR. You can review and interpret FHIR resources. You can explain relationships between resources. You can describe why implementation guides are needed. Maybe you can effectively ask some questions now from this, and you can find me. And I think we're probably really out of time, but I'm around. So you can ask me a question, ask me on Whova, stop me, etc. Right? We're out, right? Yep. Yeah. Thank you. And for all our newcomers,